All right, welcome to this week's episode of the Janus Project. Got an intriguing one for you today, and it really has to do with how to properly interpret the Bible. I just watched two different videos, and it was prompted by some of the stuff going around on Twitter this week. A lot of people are spouting off things like Jesus was a socialist and rattling things back and forth. What I'm going to do is I'm going to link two videos for you. One is from a YouTube channel called Sovietu, I think, saying Jesus was a socialist. The other is from PragerU, which says Jesus wasn't a socialist. And what I want you to do is I want you to watch these two videos, and I want you to look at the biblical content of each one. Now, what's interesting is when you tackle this topic of whether Jesus was a socialist or not, you really have to get down into the technical definition of what makes someone a socialist. There's a lot of touchy-feely, like, oh, I mean, we got to do good to the poor, and that's what the Bible commands, and that's what socialism's all about, man. And I'll have you know, socialism isn't about taking care of the poor. That's not its point. It's redistribution of wealth. It's basically a greed-based system. And it's funny because the socialists will oftentimes scream at capitalists and say they're all based on greed. Maybe. Maybe not. But the fact is, if capitalism is based on greed, so is socialism. You're looking at someone and you're saying, I want what you have. Now, they very well could have earned it. They could have stolen it. They could have inherited it. The fact is, they did not take it from you because it was never yours to begin with. That's just something you have to face the fact of when it comes to socialism. People do not owe you anything. They don't. They don't owe you kindness. They don't owe you anything. The Bible says that we are to love one another, which is an action that I am supposed to do to you. But you can't come and be like, I demand you love me. No, that's something God tells me to do to you. Has absolutely nothing. You have no right to my love, so to speak. But I am obligated. I am given the responsibility by God to show you love. That's the difference here. And so what socialism does is it comes in with this very just victimized mentality and basically says, oh, you're owed everything and you need to demand it. And that's not the case. And so I think what's really interesting is as we get into the definitions of socialism, which again is a state system that basically has all of the power in the hands of the state, that very much is not a biblical pattern. One of the big proponents as you get further and further into socialism is this idea of private ownership is bad. Well, as you watch the PragerU video, you're going to see him bring up Luke chapter 12, where there's a man who comes to Jesus and says, hey, I need you to tell my brother to give me part of the inheritance. And God's like, who am I to judge between you two? Like, basically, don't be greedy. You know, and there's this level of like, oh, that's unfair. I didn't get a big enough inheritance. Who said you deserved the inheritance? Now, what I find fascinating is the socialist mindset comes along and says, well, we're going to tax your inheritance. And it's like, hold on. My parents are the ones who get to decide what to do with their money. At least that seems to make sense to me. And so if my parents choose to say, you know what, we're going to give your older brother 75% and you're going to get 2. Well, I may absolutely hate that, but the simple truth is they get to make that call. What I find amazing about a socialist program is socialism steps in as a government and says, well, I know you already got it taxed, you know, when you earned it, and it was taxed when you spent it on anything. And then if you invested it, well, the investment is going to get taxed through capital gains or through some other form. And if you put it in the stock market, well, we're going to tax it there. And if you just kind of choose to hang on to it, well, anything above a certain point, we're going to tax again. And so you look at how many times your $1 is taxed. It's stupid. And when you stop and look at what the government's spending that money on, it's funny out here in California, you know, some of the roads they choose to repair, you're like, why? Why are you fixing that road again? They're building a bridge right now between Grass Valley and Yuba City. And it is a grand old bridge. I mean, it's pretty fascinating. But they've redone that road like 2 or 3 times over the last few years. And so they had kind of the old road, which was pretty windy, and I guess it had a little bit too much traffic, so they put this other road that kind of straightened it out a little bit. And now they're more or less going to get rid of that road, and they're building this bridge, and it's like, just stop. I remember when Obama passed the road stimulus bill way back in 2008, 2009. Basically, it was a socialist program trying to pull us out of a recession, which that doesn't work. But while he was trying to do that, it was early on in my bus driving career, and it was fascinating because they repaved the same section of road like 3 or 4 times. And I just kind of sit back and go, clearly someone was spending money that wasn't theirs. Because if a road company's that bad that they have to redo the same road section like 3 times in a row, where they put it down and then they rip it up and put it down again, they rip it up and put you're just inept and you don't deserve that job. But I find it amazing how people will talk about socialism and that Jesus was for it. What Jesus was for is Jesus was for private ownership. He talks about giving of your own money. He talks about giving out of your potential poverty. You are to give money to other people. It doesn't say anything about have the government step in, take your money, and then pass it on to people willy-nilly. In fact, as you continue, here's what you have to understand about biblical interpretation. When God speaks, Jesus could be said to have said those things too. Okay, so in Christian thought, if Jesus didn't specifically say something, but the Bible talks about it and God says it in the Bible, then that is Jesus talking as well. And so in the Old Testament, what you have is you have the ancient landmark. And so this principle of the ancient landmark, I think, is really important for you to understand. A lot of people use it to say, like, oh, don't violate the old tradition. That's not the point, okay? The ancient landmark was a property boundary, and God specifically told the rich, don't you pull any weird shenanigans where you move someone's property line in order to take over their land. In fact, he had it set up that if you were in deep debt, you could put yourself into slavery for someone for so many years, but every so many years, you were actually to be set free. And he prevented the abuse of this program, not by government fiat, but he said to them, if somebody comes to you, let's say the year before you know that everybody goes free, and they ask of you this big debt, and you know they're never going to be able to work it off, don't harden your heart and say, oh, come back in a year and I'll make it good then. No, he said you give it to them and you trust me. You trust me for that money. I'll work things out because I've got enough. And so this idea that like we should have the government step in and mandate these things and redistribute wealth. No, that's not the point. God actually mandated that rich people give. And if rich people don't give, then he's going to curse them. He's gonna punish them. In fact, if you have your priorities wrong when it comes to giving, so you are to give to a local church, you are, or in that time it was the temple, you are to give, and if you don't, God actually has a way of looking at your earnings and going, all right, time to destroy these. And I find it amazing because you look at, for instance, Joe Biden, he gave just over $300 a year over the course of like this decade. And so you're talking about these guys who talk all about socialism and taking care of the poor, and you look at what they give and you're like, this is piddly. I don't make much at all, and I give more than $300 a year, okay? I give far more than $300 a year. $300 a year is a pittance. And so if you are a guy who is raking in potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is fascinating that our politicians make that much, but if you're making that much money and you can't afford to give away, I'm sorry, you're the greedy one, so you should probably shut up about this topic. But what I find amazing, back to the issue at hand, when God talks about giving, he has a whole book of the Bible where he talks to people and he says, you're not prioritizing giving. And because you have not given to me, I am basically making your wages like it's a bag with holes in it. It's just coming out the bottom. And you're wondering where all your money's going, and it's because I'm blowing on it and I'm blowing it away. So give and take care of my things first. And I'll challenge you to find a socialist program that actually cares about the local church. No. The closest we have are tax exemptions, which had nothing to do with socialism. And so this idea that Jesus is a socialist, when throughout the Bible God talks about protecting property and not stealing other people's property and not being greedy and all of that, that's definitely not a socialist mindset. But further, as you continue to study out this topic of socialism, we get to the Apostle Paul. And one of the fascinating things, and this is why I don't believe in welfare, but for instance, there are people who they choose not to work and they choose to collect a paycheck. They are entirely physically capable of working. I'm not talking about people who are hurt and are collecting workman's comp. That's stuff that's paid in by your company. That's not welfare. But if you are collecting a paycheck from your state or your government, and you could be out there working, but you're choosing not to because your social worker said, don't work any more hours or you'll lose money. You are the specific person that the Bible verse I'm about to talk about is talking about. And you are sinning. It is a sin to not work. The Bible says, if you do not work, you should not eat. That's a biblical principle. Paul talked and he said, I had the ability because of what I was doing that I could have chosen not to work, but I chose to still do work. That way I was a good example. But I find one verse in particular extremely fascinating, and he talks about people who are unruly. And if you look at the context of this definition of unruly, I've been in enough churches, I've seen enough church splits, and I have seen pastors use the verse that says that we are to separate from those who are unruly, and they've used it to talk about people who left the church. That's not what it's talking about. That is not an unruly person. The Bible talks about an unruly person, and if you look at the very end of that passage, when it defines the word unruly, it says that these people are people who do not work. They refuse to work. So if you are someone who supports a government program because that government program is going to get you more money and you don't have to work, you are, by the biblical definition, someone who is unruly. You are refusing to do the work you are responsible to do. The Bible mandates that we work. And the socialist program is, oh, let's just take care of everybody. I'm not saying taking care of the poor is a bad thing. We should. But we don't do it through the government. We do it through private giving. We do it through generosity. We do it through the local church. We do it through other charities. But this idea that the government can step in and just start taking money is the dumbest idea ever. And are you telling me that these charities and these funds could actually be siphoning money off to pay people just to exist? Nah. You see, that's not capitalism. That is the early onset stages of socialism, when the government taxes the snot out of you and then takes that money and they give it to this little endowment over here, 15 million, and we'll give that over there. And think about the recent funds that they put out during COVID. Everyone got, $1,200, and it was $1,200 a person plus, whatever for each kid. Think about how much actually went to people and how much went to we're going to put extra money toward child care for the congressman. Oh, we're going to put extra money toward this endowment for the arts because that's so important during a pandemic that we have to send 15 million or whatever. They're spending money to help people who got them elected. They're spending money to help people who, will get them votes, get them favors. It's all well and good. You rub my back, I rub yours. That's not generosity. That's corruption. The Bible says the rich have friends. But it also says, be careful if you're someone who's greedy. When you sit to eat with a ruler, it says put a knife to your throat if you're someone given to appetite. Because basically it's better to slit your own throat than to get in bed with one of these rich people who are now going to own you. And so unchecked capitalism, sure, it's got its problems. So yeah, the government should regulate some things like monopolies and make sure people aren't being corrupt. But this idea of let's just tax the snot out of everyone who makes above a certain amount and let's just give it to people who aren't working, that's not a biblical pattern. It's not a biblical pattern at all. And so I challenge you, as you watch the two videos I'm going to link, look at which ones actually dealt with the context of the Bible and which ones dealt more with feelings. Just deal with it. Now, you can quote a pope, and you can quote philosophers, and you can quote Karl Marx. That doesn't mean it's Bible. Doesn't mean it agrees with the Bible. And so anyone who looks and says, well, you owe it to your fellow man, you really don't. You really don't. If I'm walking down the street and I choose to give money to someone, that's my choice. It's not because I owe it to them. I don't know why they're on the street. I also find it amazing in that video it talks about how good the cultures were before, dirty capitalists got involved. When you're sacrificing people and doing all sorts of brutal, just massacre stuff, study out what the Indians did before we got here. Study out what some of the tribes in Africa did before English colonists went in there. It was not good. You don't have the noble savage, okay? And I'm not a guy who believes in manifest destiny. I don't think God necessarily, said, "Oh, America, go conquer everything." But I think every nation has done it. I'm not going to apologize for what my country did because I feel bad. Your country did it too, okay? So Every country in the world that exists probably took land from someone else. It's just what happens. If you're going to whine about it, then, oh, the Indians took land from other Indians. And who took that from? Well, whoever was living there before the Indians. They got conquered by them. And you know what? They came in and they took it from the animals. Well, okay. So somebody took it from someone. We don't have some, like, sacred land that someone was given. It was conquest. And some of it was done really brutally. And some of it was done through buying it. And some of it was done when it was like, oh, I sold it for a few shells and I didn't know what I was selling. That's life. If you're going to hold a grudge over things that happened 200 years ago to someone who wasn't even you or related to you, you just need to get a life. I mean, that's seriously what you need to do. But what's amazing is people who will say, we need to give the land back to the Indians. Well, who did the Indians take it from? Because it was not just their land. They had conquered other tribes. Take this, for instance. When the conquistadors arrived in Mexico, or what would eventually be Mexico, why do you think so many of the tribes joined with them to defeat the people who were in charge? Because they were brutal. They weren't wonderful and great, all right? And so as you listen to some of these videos, just pay attention. Listen to those. Listen to who interprets the Bible in its own context and genuinely, all right? The Bible will teach us to be kind to one another. It will teach us to be gentle. It'll teach us to be forgiving. And yes, war doesn't tend to be like that. But look at any time it commands a government to do that. Look at any time it commands a government to do any of those things. And look at any time that the Bible speaks badly of private ownership of property or self-defense. No. And so it's just interesting to pay attention to. People can use the Bible to say whatever they want, but it takes a man to say, you know what? The Bible doesn't really comment on that one. Or, these verses over here really seem to suggest that the Bible has this mindset. And part of it is you're personally responsible. Now, you may not be as rich as the guy next to you. In fact, Ecclesiastes talks a lot about riches and says, you know what? A lot of times God gives riches to people, and sometimes they die and they pass it on to other people. Sometimes he gives riches just so that it can be taken away and given to someone else. But it's not the government that does that. It's God who, acts in certain ways. And so just be very careful. Socialism is a very greedy idea. Don't buy into it, okay? The idea that the government should own everything and that you shouldn't have any private property and all of that stuff, that's not biblical. It's not even American. I mean, American's not completely biblical either, but those mindsets are completely foreign to our way of life, and they don't work. Name me one country where socialism has actually worked. Most of the ones you're going to name are places that say, we aren't socialist. Stop using us as examples. Socialism doesn't work. I like the quote Margaret Thatcher made. The problem with socialism is eventually you run out of other people's money. California is experiencing that right now. People are fleeing California because it's too expensive to live here, because they tax the snot out of you so that they can give it to poor people. And you can't not be a poor people because it's too expensive to live here. So just think through your actions. Don't buy into a topic just because it sounds emotionally pleasing. Don't be dumb. Jesus wasn't a socialist. If you want proof, go watch the Prager University video. Puts it in really good context. And if you want to see the emotional other side of the story, go watch the Soviet episode about the same topic. Jesus wasn't a socialist. Okay? God is okay with property rights. God is okay with self-defense. God is okay with a lot of those topics. That's the Bible. But read the Bible in its own context and look at the way the Bible approaches things. If you have questions, leave them in the comments. I'd love to give some feedback on this issue. But it's something I see cropping up a lot, and so it's something I felt I should address this week. Anyway, this has been another episode of the Janus Project. Guys, please like it, subscribe, share with a friend, and I will catch you next week.